Can Burkina Faso teach Europe how to progress without taking advantage of anyone? The world order is being turned upside down by Burkina Faso, a tiny landlocked country that is seldom acknowledged by most major nations. It is displacing Europe as the next great power in the world. Burkina Faso, led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, is becoming an unstoppable force that even the powerful West cannot contain. Which is more startling? This change is taking place without the consent, assistance, or intervention of the West. After decades of controlling Africa, the West is now powerless to stop Burkina Faso from seizing control of its resources, developing an independent military that serves its own people, and creating a self-sufficient economy. However, how has this tiny country accomplished what the West deemed unthinkable? Let's investigate. What was Burkina Faso's strategy for seizing control of its resources? Captain Ibrahim Traoré stated that the decision was made with the express intent of putting the nation back on the correct path and uniting the armed forces to defend the country's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and support national recovery. He noted that the theme of the gathering emphasized the employability of young people in rural areas, highlighting issues such as looting. Traoré pointed out that many young people were working in extremely difficult conditions at artisanal production sites, similar to what may have occurred in America or Europe in the 1800s. He described how these young people often worked in self-dug galleries to extract ore, facing significant personal risks. He also mentioned efforts to modernize these conditions and stated that they had developed some aspects to society that would emerge from this process. All of it started with a single revolutionary choice that would change the course of history in Burkina Faso and spread throughout Africa. Western companies exploited Burkina Faso's enormous gold and mineral deposits for years, enjoying unrestricted access to the country while the local populations were left with little more than contaminated land and hopes. These companies left nothing but devastation in their wake, acting as though Burkina Faso was theirs to plunder. However, that was about to alter. Strikingly, brave and resolute, Captain Ibrahim Traoré saw that the nation's resources were being embezzled, leaving the Burkina Faso people with very little to show for their efforts. For him, this went beyond being a domestic problem. It was a question of justice, sovereignty, and dignity. The country's mining code underwent significant modifications under Traoré's administration, which marked a turning point. These adjustments went beyond the law. They represented a total overhaul of Burkina Faso's approach to managing its most important resources. This is the fascinating part. The requirement for disclosure was one of this new mining code's most potent clauses. Burkina Faso was no longer going to allow foreign enterprises to operate under false pretenses through dubious agreements. They demanded that these businesses disclose who really owned them. Someone was making money off of their land. This openness rocked the status quo and caused ripples throughout the sector. But the idea of local revenue sharing was where Traoré's reforms truly shined. 20% of the taxes gathered from these mining operations were distributed to nearby communities directly for the first time. Give that some thought. It meant that people could now really witness real advantages returning to their towns and villages, rather than having to watch helplessly as their land was plundered and destroyed. The financial means to fund long-neglected community projects, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure suddenly became available to municipal and regional authorities. This transformation went beyond the economy. It was an independence proclamation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré said, "We are no longer a resource colony." The reforms caused such a stir throughout the continent because they were so revolutionary. Burkina Faso's reforms did more than just shake up the mining industry. They sparked a movement. Resource nationalism is the powerful idea that a country's resources should benefit its people first and foremost. This idea has long been opposed by the West, for obvious reasons. Other countries, such as Ghana, Tanzania, and South Africa, were paying close attention, realizing that they too could seize control of their resources and finally ensure their people benefited from their land's wealth. Because it poses a threat to the centuries-old system of economic exploitation as a whole. But things are starting to change. Burkina Faso's audacious decision to retrieve its money from multinational firms has created a pathway for other African countries to follow. The continent is suddenly realizing that there may be a time in the future when it won't have to follow the dictates of the superpowers that have long controlled its resources. Rather, Africa is establishing its own regulations, with Burkina Faso in the forefront. There is more at stake here than just ownership and taxes. It has to do with redistributing the power. Once certain in its supremacy, the West is currently being compelled to reconsider its strategy. They can no longer plunder Africa's riches and leave its people with little more than scraps. They can no longer act with impunity. Burkina Faso's position indicates that the period of exploitation is about to finish. Regaining control over its resources was a significant step, but Burkina Faso's revolution continued. At this point, the nation is accomplishing something even more amazing. Feeding its people without needing help from the West. And without assistance from the West, how is Burkina Faso becoming self-sufficient in food? Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Western countries have functioned for decades with the presumption that Africa would always need them to survive. For a long time, the only hope for food in secure African countries has been promoted by foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, and international humanitarian initiatives. With a daring and revolutionary agricultural policy that is lowering reliance on aid and establishing Burkina Faso as a leader in food sovereignty, the nation is dispelling this illusion. Captain Traoré's government made a revolutionary investment in May 2024. Local farmers received agricultural equipment valued at more over 78 billion francs CFA. Tractors, motor pumps, tillers, and other necessary farming equipment were included in this investment. It was not an isolated act of kindness. It was a component of the Agro-Pastoral and Fisheries Offensive 2023 to 2025, a comprehensive plan meant to transform the nation's farming industry. The aim was straightforward but profound. It would feed itself, Burkina Faso. This endeavor has had nothing less than astounding results. Farmers all around the nation are producing food on a never-before-seen scale thanks to this new machinery. Burkina Faso is getting closer to being self-sufficient, meaning that the days of depending on foreign food help are quickly coming to an end. However, the strategy's sustainability is much more astounding. In addition to providing financial support, the government has given farmers the tools they need to implement more sustainable farming methods that will guarantee long-term food security. For example, the government of Burkina Faso has been collaborating with groups such as Solidarité to implement new farming methods. Like half-moons to conserve water, farmers have been able to recover land that was once unusable because of desertification and climate change thanks to these methods. The outcomes clearly demonstrate the situation. Participating families' rates of self-sufficiency have surged from 12% to 80%. This kind of change is not only addressing the current food crisis, it is also developing a sustainable agricultural model that can withstand the effects of climate change and unstable political environments. However, this success has drawn criticism from the West. Without the millions of dollars in aid that have historically gone into African nations, how is Burkina Faso making such rapid progress? Burkina Faso's rejection of the aid reliance model holds the key to the solution. The government of Traoré is aware that grants from abroad frequently have constraints on a country's ability to govern its policies and maintain its sovereignty. By making investments in its farming industry, By taking charge of its food supply, Burkina Faso has liberated itself from the caprices of foreign donors. This change has important ramifications for Africa overall, as well as for Burkina Faso. The continent is no longer seen as a source of solutions, but rather as a destination for aid. However, Burkina Faso's agricultural achievements are rewriting that story. African countries are starting to realize that they can take matters into their own hands and do not have to wait for handouts, precisely as Burkina Faso has. The West is terrified by this audacious new vision for Africa, because it calls into question the basis of its authority over the region. While Burkina Faso's ability to feed itself may have been overestimated by the West, they failed to anticipate the country's swift development of an autonomous military that functions independently of Western supervision. What was Burkina Faso's method? The rise of Burkina Faso is not only economic but also military. And this is what's probably rocked the West the most. Western countries have been controlling and regulating Africa's military might for decades. They made sure that African armies were never powerful enough to function on their own by selling the weapons and providing the necessary training. However, Burkina Faso completely destroyed that model. Burkina Faso invested $1 billion in military hardware in 2023, but none of it came from the West. Rather, the country went to China to meet its military requirements, acquiring armored cars, unmanned aerial vehicles, and helicopters made expressly to protect the nation's sovereignty from both external and domestic threats. The acquisition of 50 CSVP-14 and 40 EP-11 armored vehicles, mine-resistant, ambush-protected MRAP vehicles that can endure even the most intensive combat scenarios, was the focus of this military modernization effort. This goes beyond a simple arms transaction. A change in the balance of power in the world. Since they are no longer providing Burkina Faso with armaments, the West can no longer dictate the country's defense policy. Furthermore, Burkina Faso's military has a purpose. It is vigorously defending the country from insurgency threats and reaffirming its autonomy from military influence from the West. The decision to align with China rather than the West carries significant ramifications. It denotes a change in international relationships. To start, Burkina Faso is securing not only its borders but also its autonomy through diversifying its military partnerships. And the West. Africa is no longer subject to Western arms dealers or their rules. They watch in dismay as this little country develops an increasingly potent military without consulting them. But what happens when a country does this without external oversight? For Burkina Faso, this means having a military that follows its rules. It implies a military that serves its people, not foreign interests, and is freed from the entanglements of international arms sales, which frequently have hidden intentions. And for this reason, the West finds Burkina Faso's military rise so frightening. What stops the other African nations from doing the same if one can? In actuality, Burkina Faso's military independence is indicative of a wider African trend, an unstoppable trend that the West cannot reverse. All around the continent, countries are starting to wonder if they really need the military support of the West and are looking into new alliances with states like China and Russia, formerly secure in its position as Africa's main arms supplier. The West now has to deal with the fact that African countries are strengthening their armed forces independently of them. Although Burkina Faso's military independence has drawn attention from around the world, their innovative and self-reliant approach to healthcare is equally noteworthy. And what medical surprises are in store? The bulk of people in most of Africa are left to fend for themselves, with healthcare continuing to be a privilege for the elite. For a long time, Western countries have portrayed themselves as the ones who can save Africa's healthcare system. But Burkina Faso is showing that genuine healthcare reform can be achieved without outside assistance. It necessitates national dedication. The government of Captain Traoré has prioritized healthcare, establishing a fleet of 15 mobile clinics to provide basic medical care to everyone. Worth $8.8 million, these clinics provide a vital link for long underserved rural regions. The fact that this project isn't supported by foreign aid, however, is what's really groundbreaking. It's produced locally. Essential services including immunizations, cancer screenings, and routine examinations are offered by each mobile clinic. And even testing for HIV. From emergency services to prenatal care, they are prepared to manage a broad spectrum of medical demands, guaranteeing that even the most vulnerable people have access to life-saving care. And in contrast to the Western model, which involves wealthy individuals traveling to Europe for medical care, Burkina Faso's strategy guarantees that healthcare is accessible to everybody, wherever they may reside. This program is a component of a larger $26 to $58 million national effort to enhance nutrition and health. The assertion that Burkina Faso can provide for its people is audacious. More than anything, though, it serves as a warning to the rest of Africa that real healthcare change is possible without relying on outside funding. It calls for national leadership and a dedication to prioritizing the needs of the populace. Assume Burkina Faso continues down this path. What may it appear like after a few years? Should Burkina Faso maintain its current course, Burkina Faso's control over its natural resources could result in a thriving economy driven by domestic revenue rather than foreign exploitation. The mining sector would flourish under local ownership, funneling wealth directly into the communities and national projects. This economic independence could allow Burkina Faso to further diversify into other sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and technology, reducing reliance on foreign markets and aid. Burkina Faso could transform into a powerful, self-reliant nation that sets the standard for African sovereignty. Burkina Faso may become a food-secure nation as a result of its agricultural revolution, and it may even export more crops to its neighbors. Resilience against climate change would be ensured by sustainable farming methods, converting formerly unproductive agricultural zones into productive ones. Burkina Faso may serve as an African food sovereignty example in a few years, encouraging other countries to take its example. The autonomous armed forces of Burkina Faso have the potential to become among the strongest in West Africa. The country may protect its borders from insurgency threats and potentially take on a more major role in regional security if it keeps investing in military technologies and forms partnerships outside of the West. Burkina Faso may take the lead in regional coalitions that handle security issues throughout the continent as its military gets stronger, reducing Western dominance in military matters in Africa even more. The development of new health infrastructure and the proliferation of mobile clinics could significantly increase access to healthcare. Burkina Faso's emphasis on healthcare could lead to markedly lower death rates, better outcomes for mothers' health, and longer life expectancies. Leading the way in public healthcare innovation, the nation might serve as an example for other African countries, encouraging them to give indigenous solutions precedence over models that rely on foreign aid. Burkina Faso has the potential to become a political powerhouse in Africa, promoting resource ownership, independence, and sovereignty. The political model of the nation, which is based on transparency and leadership that prioritizes the needs of the people over those of foreign powers, may persuade other countries to enact comparable changes. Burkina Faso may take the lead in advancing the discussion of African independence from Western influence in regional institutions such as the African Union. If Burkina Faso continues on its current path, it may in a few years emerge as a symbol of African sovereignty and resiliency, upending the long-standing Western perception of Africa as a dependent continent. In addition to securing its own destiny, the nation might pave the way for a new era of African empowerment and global leadership. What Burkina Faso's success ultimately means for Africa is the question. The rise of Burkina Faso involves more than one country. It concerns Africa's future as a whole. The West has operated for centuries with the presumption that Africa would always require their assistance. However, Burkina Faso is demonstrating to the world that Africa is self-sufficient in the West. All they need is leadership that is optimistic about the continent's future. In Burkina Faso, we are witnessing the beginning of an African sovereignty revolution. Burkina Faso is demonstrating that African countries can stand on their own by taking charge of their resources, becoming food self-sufficient, developing an autonomous military, and offering healthcare without the need for outside assistance. Furthermore, this isn't only theoretical. Actual outcomes are being achieved in real time. There are significant ramifications for the remainder of Africa. As a result of Burkina Faso's success, other countries are starting to reevaluate their ties to Western powers. Resource nationalism is becoming a reality, as is military autonomy and healthcare reform. These are attainable objectives. Burkina Faso has set the continent on fire, and the West is at a loss for ideas about how to put out the fire. However, it's possible that they won't be able to. Africa's future is not dependent on the West, as Burkina Faso has already demonstrated. Africa is the determining factor. How long before the rest of the continent does the same is the question at hand. Will the West eventually be removed from Africa? Will Traoré lead this course? Perhaps the locals get the credit for standing up for leaders like Traoré and rejecting puppet leaders. Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.